Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM or on our website, www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. So on the program, we will be joined by Keisha Hudson, the Chief Defender of the Philadelphia Defenders Association, and Councilmember David O to discuss the recently released special report on the Department of Human Services child separation policy. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good, Larry. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. It's been a busy week, and it's only Wednesday. A lot has happened, and a lot will happen.
Mhm.
And the big thing that I think kind of blew everything else out of the water this week was the leaked Supreme Court opinion.
Yes. Uh,
And it was just serendipity that we had probably the perfect person to speak to about that
mhm.
in Keisha Hudson, and we hadn't planned on that. We
No,
were going to
we
talk about
we were
other
going to talk
things.
about everything else, but you kind of couldn't get away from that because I to tell you how big an event this leaked Supreme Court opinion. And for those of you who don't know, the brief was leaked that shows that the Supreme Court is getting ready to strike down Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision that made abortion legal in this country. And to tell you just how big a deal this was, I got a call from the folks at the BBC in Wales on the night that the draft was leaked. And I had done some work with them over the 2020 election, but I hadn't heard from them since. So they reached out to me to ask me about this leak and what it means for, abortion rights in this country and stuff. And the irony is that Wales is one of those countries that abortion hasn't been legal for all that long there. So, they wanted to find out what was going on with America and what was happening with abortion rights. And I'm like, okay, so I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning doing a morning show in Wales over this. But it's this is one of those occasions where two things come up to me. One, I am no longer of childbearing age, and I am eternally grateful for that because if I were still of childbearing age and I had to deal with the fact that I might literally be forced to have a baby, I would probably be looking for another country to go to, if not something more drastic. And another thing that it brought up to me is since the year 2000, the Bush v. Gore election, whenever folks would ask me about the politics and different things, the one thing I would always say is people need to start paying more attention to the Supreme Court because there are a lot of decisions coming down the pike that will affect things that you took for granted when Holder v Shelby County v Holder came down and they struck down a major provision of the Voting Rights Act. That didn't surprise me because the court was being structured in a way where that was about to go exactly how it went. The court has since been structured in a way that abortion rights are probably going to be gone. But just like them on a national level, you should also keep an eye out on the right to get birth control. Same sex marriage is on the chopping block, probably.
Yep.
There are a whole lot of rights that a lot of people took for granted, and no one took into consideration that the people who did not want you to have these rights, well, they had kids. And guess what they told them?
And it's it's the kind of thing we're not going to know right now exactly what's going to happen. This decision isn't expected to be released until June.
Right.
Um, Things could change, but my suspicion is they won't. I think this is what we're going to see in June, or something very similar to it.
Well, you're probably right about that. And what else this should say to people is that, you know, when someone tells you that the court is at stake, you need to listen. And another discussion that we're going to be having more of, and I heard this morning on a debate that WURD had regarding with the three Democratic candidates running for Senate. You're going to hear more talk about expanding the Supreme Court, because under the Constitution, it doesn't say how many people you have to have on the Supreme Court. It used to be more than 9.
Yeah.
And then it
Yeah.
was shrunk down to 9.
Mm-hmm.
But 9 is a pretty arbitrary number. And you have a lot of people, especially in light of this whole thing with the Roe v. Wade draft, that are talking about it's time to expand the court. It's time to make it bigger. And, and it's time to make it bigger because it's basically packed with people that want to take us back to 1958. And we can't have that. But expanding the court is not going to be as easy as everyone thinks. And it's not just going to be because you're going to have Republicans opposing that. It's going to be because you're going to have some Democrats opposing that, particularly the ones that are very committed to old school Senate rules. Like, for example, President Biden.
Yeah.
President Biden remembers the Senate when it was a more collegial body that had discussions with each other and came to decisions together. And even if they didn't agree on everything, they thought about what was best for the country. Those days are gone. Those days have been gone for a while. And for some reason, the president, like many people, in his group of senators, they don't understand that those days are over. Mitch
Yeah.
McConnell understands it, and that's how he's conducted himself. But
Yeah.
the fact that you have so many Democrats who are of a certain age that have not figured this out is going to make expanding the court a lot harder than a lot of people think.
No, I agree with you. You probably wouldn't have the votes right now.
No.
However, after the midterms, typically the president's party loses seats.
Yeah.
However, there are 2 caveats to that this year, maybe 3. The first being that the Senate map is particularly kind to Democrats in this midterm. They shouldn't lose any seats, and they should probably pick one up. Then you have this ruling.
Yeah, the argument can be made that the Republicans overplayed their hand on this one.
That's my thought, yeah. And you're going to have a lot of people who may have been shrugging their shoulders about this election come out and vote. The third thing is the possibility that the president finally does something about student debt closer to the election, which is what I think the plan might be. Let's wait, and then we'll do it in September or October when it'll have the most electoral significance, and hopefully those voters come out. I don't think this upcoming election is going to follow the usual pattern in a lot of ways. And yeah, I could be wrong about that. I don't know. But it seems to me that there are a lot of different elements right now, especially and particularly what happened the other night with this leaked decision.
I think that the Roe v. Wade decision is going to have more of an impact than the possibility of student loans. Now, I know that what I am about to say is really unpopular, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you take on the issue of student loan debt before you take on the issue of medical debt, you are hustling backwards. Because when you look at the percentage of people with medical debt and the percentage of people with student loan debt, not even half of the country has student loan debt, but
A
you've
big
got
disparity.
almost half of the country that is having to file for bankruptcy and do all this other stuff because of medical debt. I understand that people want their student loans cut down. I am in a house where not only do you have undergraduate student loans, you got at least 2 or 3 sets of graduate student loans in my house. But I spent the whole month of November 2011 in the hospital because I didn't have insurance and I almost lost my foot. I am going to be paying for that until I am old and gray and maybe even dead. I would rather see people who have almost lost limbs, people who have had to file for bankruptcy and all of that stuff due to medical debt. I'd rather you take care of that first because there are more people in need of that. Like I said, I understand the student loan thing. I'm not saying that something should be done about it because let's face it, my student loans cost less than a lot of other people's student loans because I got mine through the government and not through a bank. But, you know, medical debt, more people are affected by that. And just once, I would like to see us do something in this country that truly benefits the majority.
Oh, that's right. And it's, there are so many different things that seem like they could be done with the stroke of a pen, but
Mhm.
we're not seeing that yet. And I wonder, like I said, if we get closer to the election, if we start seeing some of those things. Um, but um, what we'll do now is we're going to play our interview with Keisha Hudson, and we talk about I think, two very, very important things in this interview. The first, of course, is the potential of the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Mhm.
The other is the situation the Defenders Association finds itself in terms of funding. And we talk about this in the interview when we look at what equity truly is, especially in this city, the poorest big city in America, to have an underfunded public defender association is exasperating all these problems we have. So those are some of the things we talk about with Keisha Hudson, the chief defender of the Philadelphia Defenders Association.
We're back with more of Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5. And we're here with, forgive me, I'm having one of those days. And we are here with Keisha Hudson. She is the head of the Defenders Association of Philadelphia. These are the people who give you, when you hear your Miranda rights and it says you have the right to an attorney, and if you can't afford one, what will be provided by the state? That is the job that Ms. Hudson does here in Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
Now, late last night, we're recording this on Tuesday. A pretty unprecedented thing happened with the Supreme Court in that a draft of one of their opinions, specifically one on on Roe v. Wade, the decision that made abortion legal, was released to the public. And under this decision, as it's currently drafted, the right to choose is about to go away. I guess I wanted to start off by asking you, have you seen this draft opinion? What did you think? And if I'm a if I'm a woman in Philadelphia, what does this mean for me?
Right. I did see the draft opinion. I didn't read the entire opinion, but read enough to, where some alarms were sounded. I think for me and any woman reading that draft opinion last night. I think for the court to say that the right to abortion has no federal constitutional basis. And that it really needs to be left up to the states is alarming. And in a state like Pennsylvania, we have a significant election coming up The House, the Senate is under Republican control here in Pennsylvania. If we have a Republican governor that wins the election, we may very well see the right to abortion, go away in Pennsylvania. So I think given the concerns that I think myself and many others have about what will happen, in this gubernatorial election with a Republican and House and Senate controlled legislature, we have every right to be concerned.
Now, there are other, like when I was on social media last night and I was hearing about this decision, there were other decisions that people were also expressing concern about, specifically Griswold versus Connecticut, the decision that allows birth control to be legal. A lot of people were talking about Obergefell, the Obergefell decision that allowed same-sex marriage to be legal, and others were talking about decisions that were directly connected to civil rights, because what all of these decisions have in common is a right to privacy.
Right.
Is that also something that we need to be looking at as this goes forward? Do Americans have a right to privacy, or will we have a right to privacy afterward?
I think when you take a look at the opinion, I think anyone, I don't think you need a legal degree to when you look at this draft opinion to see that the court is directly attacking the right to privacy, and when this case first made its way to the Supreme Court, there were a lot of advocacy organizations, women's rights organizations, abortion rights organizations that were really saying that the court would never do this. The Roe versus Wade and the right to abortion is so enshrined. It is precedent. The court, doesn't have a history of overturning, cases like this. And here we are. We are on the cusp of overturning Roe versus Wade. And the heart of the draft opinion is an attack on the right to privacy. The court wants the state legislatures to be able to decide these important rights, starting with abortion. But I think we should be concerned that this is only the beginning. I do think that it is possible that in the future we will see the erosion to the right to privacy in other contexts, birth control, interracial marriage, same-sex marriage. I think that all of those decisions are in jeopardy.
Okay. Now, in terms of what you do in Philadelphia, do you handle these kinds of issues a lot or at all?
No, we don't have these issues. We represent 70% of people who are arrested and charged with criminal offenses in Pennsylvania, and so if we in the future, if Pennsylvania does get legislation passed, banning abortion, then it's going to be another conversation in terms of what that may look like. For anyone violating that law, and whether or not a prosecutor would decide to charge and prosecute someone for having an abortion. Issues that may make its way to us. Philadelphia has a progressive prosecutor in Larry Krasner. And so, the prosecution would have the power to determine. There are laws on the books, but I'm not going to prosecute anyone for violating those laws. Again, it remains to be seen, what happens if Larry Krasner decides he's not going to seek re-election, or if he's defeated, in the next election, what that might look like. For right now, it's not an issue for us. It's not a case that comes through our doors. But what the future holds, I think, will depend on depend on what the political landscape looks like.
How much of your job as someone who handles the defense of people who are basically indigent, how much of your job depends on political wins? Because when you look at how much the defense in like in your case the defender's office gets to do what it needs to do to protect the rights of people who cannot afford an attorney of their own, and you look at how much the prosecution almost always gets to try this person, there's no way that balances. But we're only now having a conversation where we're talking about funding defense at all. So how much of what you do is predicated on politics?
It very much is. I will say Pennsylvania is the only state in the country where the state legislature does not provide a single penny to fund public defense systems. We are the only state. 67 counties in Pennsylvania, every county public defender is funded by that county government. In Philadelphia, we're funded by the city of Philadelphia. So we get no funding from the state legislature. And again, the only state in the country where that is the case. Funding for public defense has never been a priority for politicians. You can imagine that the people we represent, all of whom are presumed innocent until found guilty. We all enjoy that presumption of innocence, but once you are caught in the criminal justice system, not the most sympathetic population. And so we've never been a priority for funding. And in budget cycle after budget cycle in the city of Philadelphia, we see that. So my push now to increase the funding allocation for the Defender Association is not new. Chief defenders prior to my tenure have been pushing for this, have been advocating for more funding for decades. Our office has been chronically underfunded, and unless we have people in city council and unless the mayor gets some political courage to invest in public defense, this is going to be a fight that is going to continue during my tenure and possibly long after my tenure.
Okay. Well, I'd like to turn it over right now to Larry McGlynn, my co-host here on Hall Monitor. And here you go, Larry.
Thanks, Denise. And Ms. Hudson, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to focus a little bit on your office and the budget hearing from last week. But before we do that, I just want to bring up one more thing about the Supreme Court from last night. And I'm not an attorney, and I don't know anything. So I just want to make that as clear as possible. But one thing that was equally as alarming to me, and I'll just be blunt about this opinion that was leaked, is also the other cases that were referenced.
Right.
Particularly dealing with gay marriage and other things that are fundamentally important. It almost felt to me, and again, my uneducated opinion about these matters, that the groundwork may be being laid to attack other rights that we've just accepted as human rights. And I was just wondering, do you feel a similar sense of concern going forward?
I do. I'm gravely concerned. Again, we've only seen a first draft. It's not the final opinion. And so when the final opinion gets issued, we'll see what the court's reasoning is for overturning precedent. But again, from what I've reviewed and what the court is saying about the right to privacy, what the court is saying about this being states' rights and left up to states, and looking around the country where there are 13 states that have legislation ready to go to ban abortion and presumably others will follow. When I look at states like Pennsylvania, where the election is going to decide, who controls the governor position. I do think that that we have a right to be concerned that yes, abortion rights are going away, but what does that mean for other rights, other human rights, where at the heart of those human rights is the right to privacy. I think all of those rights that we enjoy and have taken for granted are threatened.
Yeah, and as things maybe become a little clearer, or we learn more about this, maybe you could come back and we could talk more about that at another time, because it's certainly frightening.
It absolutely is.
So I'd like to shift a little bit to your office, and particularly the budget hearing last week. And this is another thing where you'll have to forgive my ignorance. I didn't realize that the public defender's office was not necessarily a city agency. It's more of a quasi kind of city agency. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yes, so the Defender Association has actually been around since 1934, and we have an important United States Supreme Court decision, Gideon versus Wainwright, which guaranteed the right to counsel for those who cannot afford counsel. But the Defender Association, was around for 30 years before that United States Supreme Court opinion in Gideon versus Wainwright. We started as a community defender, a very small organization, and today an organization of almost 500 staffers. But we do get all of our funding from the city of Philadelphia. We are not considered a city agency. We are run by an independent board of directors. We are a quasi-city agency because we have a significant number of the members of our board who are appointed by the city. So we are not a city agency. I would say we're a quasi-city agency, but we do get all of our funding from the city of Philadelphia.
And you said that you have 500 employees. How many of them are lawyers?
We are funded to have about 250 attorneys. So a large public defender organization, not the largest in the country, but one of the largest. And we actually do not have enough attorneys to handle the cases that come through the Philadelphia court system, but we are funded to have 250 attorneys.
Okay, so 250 attorneys, and about how many cases per year would you say your organization handles?
So we represent 70% of the cases that come through the criminal. Our attorneys appeared in over 200,000 instances where our attorneys were in court on some proceeding, from preliminary arraignment to a preliminary hearing, to trial, to sentencing, and so it's a significant caseload.
Did you say 200,000?
200,000 hearings, 200,000 court appearances. Yes.
In 1 year?
In 1 year.
For 250 attorneys?
250 attorneys, yes.
Oh my goodness. Now,
yes.
That right there is sort of the crux of one of the things we're talking about here. The district attorney's office has about 300 attorneys, but they don't handle as many cases as you do.
So that's what is important to note about the district attorney's offices. While we represent 70% of the cases in Philadelphia, they do take on 100% of the cases. We cannot represent everyone charged with a criminal offense who cannot afford counsel due to issues around conflict. So if we represent a client and their co-defendants who are arrested with our client, we cannot also represent the co-defendants. So they get appointed private counsel. So we handle a significant amount of cases. I think what is important to note is that our preparation for these cases is is a lot more significant than what you would see for the preparation of a case, from a district attorney's perspective. We have less resources. The prosecution's office has the entire police department as an investigative agency. They have other state and federal agencies that they work with to help them get their cases ready for court. I have investigators. I have 27 investigators, and I think our organization is fortunate to have the investigators. But we have, when we compare our resources to the district attorney's office, we have far less resources. So our work looks different, right? It's when a case comes into our office, it's the work that everyone from the administrative staff members do to get that case ready, to the attorney meeting with the client at the jails, to the investigator who has to look at the case and investigate the case, to the social worker. And we have social workers who work with our clients that connect them to resources. And then the attorneys going into court prepared to represent clients who are in jeopardy of losing their liberty.
So you have less resources, fewer lawyers, more cases, and it would seem to me that your staff does a significant amount of work. When we talk about compensation, how is your staff compensated compared to, say, the district attorney's office or other legal entities throughout the city, or even the private sector?
So that's the entire justification behind my budget push, during this budget cycle. We do not have parity with the district attorney's office, and our organization is not unique. If you take a look at public defense agencies around the state, around the country, it's the rare public defender agency that actually is able to compensate its staff at the same rate of a district attorney's office. So our situation is not unique in that sense. In Philadelphia, just one data point for us, the base starting salary for the district attorney's office is $40,000. That's their base. Our base starting salary is $29,000. Which qualifies our staff who make $29,000 a year for SNAP and LIHEAP benefits. So that is just one data point that I brought out, during my budget testimony, is that, if we can even raise the starting salary to be on par with the district attorneys, that $29,000 raised up to $40,000 would have a significant financial impact for our staff.
And what is the starting salary for an attorney?
The starting salary for an attorney is $57,000. The starting salary for an attorney at the district attorney's office is $64,000. So again, we are below where the district attorney's office starts their attorneys. Our attorneys make 89 cents to their dollar.
And what does that do in terms of retention?
Last year was, a challenging year for us. Our organization, like many organizations, in the state, around the country, are facing attrition. And when I look at the primary reason our attorneys and non-attorneys leave the organization, salary is the number one issue. Virtually every city agency pays more. Virtually every city agency, all city agencies have a pension, and our office does not have a pension. We're not part of the city's pension plan. So when I talk to staff who are leaving, and I actually do the exit interviews because I want to hear, well, why are you leaving the organization? It is never because of the work. People come to this work because they want to dedicate their careers to public interest. They care about the clients. They're very passionate about the work they do. They are just not paid well enough to be able to support themselves and their families. And they're leaving for other city agencies that are paying $10,000, $15,000, or $20,000 more. In addition, they're getting a pension.
And, when we're talking about the whole conversation about student loan debt, things like that, it makes sense. It's understandable that people feel like they have to move somewhere else to make more money in order to keep up with their obligations.
Correct. I mean, our attorneys are carrying, in excess, many of them in excess of $200,000 in student loans, and so that is absolutely a factor in the decision to leave the organization. Many of them are staying in public defense. They're not changing careers, but they're going to agencies, including the neighboring counties that have now lifted residency requirements. So Delaware County Public Defender's Office lifted their residency requirement. So we had attorneys who, don't have to live in Delaware County. They can now apply and have applied and are now working in that office. They are getting paid more and they get a pension.
Now, why is the Public Defenders Association not in the city pension plan?
That is a great question, and that came up during the budget testimony last week. The city, we've been having a conversation with the city about joining their pension plan, and where it is right now is that the city consulted with an outside law firm that issued an opinion that says that if our organization were to be part of the city's pension plan, the city would lose its tax exempt status. We then went and got our own outside law firm, that issued an opinion saying, here are the reasons why that is not a concern. And really, I thought, compellingly lays out a case for why we can be part of the city's pension plan. It is now up to the city's law department to make the final call. So that's where we are right now. I'm not pushing the issue around pension this budget cycle because it's a conversation that we have been having with the city for years now. The city is supportive of, and we have several city council members who are supportive of our office being part of the pension. The question right now is, if we do become part of the pension plan, does that impact the city's tax exempt status? My take and our law firm's opinion is that it does not.
Yeah, and again, I'm not an attorney, but it just seems I don't understand that argument at all. But it just seems natural because you get your funding from the city, you're doing work on behalf of the city, that your employees get that benefit. It just seems like a no-brainer to me.
I agree with you. I agree with you, and I think I think it's a fight that we're going to continue to push. And making the case for why the economic outlook for so many of our employees is bleak because they do not have a pension. And I'll drop one other data point that I think is important to note. 15% of the employees of our organization are over the age of 65. So when you look at organizations as large as ours, you would not find that larger number of people who are past retirement age. And to me, that's really a compelling point. Our staff, while they enjoy the work, while they're committed to the work, literally cannot retire. They do not retire. I have 78-year-old and I have an 82-year-old staff member here. And their financial outlook is bleak. They have to stay employed in order to support their families because they have not saved enough for retirement.
And I remember you had mentioned that in the hearing, and that's one of the most heartbreaking things because you have people who dedicated their life to public service, and this is how they've been rewarded for it. Very troubling to hear that.
It is, and it's a racial issue because the majority of our non-attorney staff are people of color. They're lifelong Philadelphia residents, and they have been working here full time, some for decades, and are still at the financial point where they either cannot support their families on the salaries they have. So many of them have second and third jobs. And they cannot retire because they have not put away enough for retirement. You can imagine someone making $29 or $33 or $40,000 who've been with an organization for 40 years. When you're making that little, you're really not able to put enough away for any sort of retirement.
Yeah, that's terrible. And when we talk about Philadelphia being the poorest big city in America, and we also balance that against the fact that everybody has a right to a defense, I just think when we look at how your organization is making this work as well as you can with what you have. But you're going to have turnover, which clearly holds things up, and makes things more challenging.
And one point, one point that I make is that public defenders are not, we're not puzzle, we're not puzzle pieces. And so, I get asked the question, well, how many attorneys do you have on staff? And it really doesn't matter, because when an attorney leaves who has 3 or 5 or 10 years of experience, and we're losing seasoned attorneys, these are the attorneys handling the really serious cases, the gun cases, the homicide cases, the sexual assault cases. These are really seasoned attorneys, and trying to replace them is incredibly difficult. I also cannot take an attorney who's 6 months out of law school, who I may have them on staff, to say, okay, now you are going to do this homicide case. And so, the challenge here, I think, is trying to get the city, the mayor, politicians to understand that we have to continue to invest in training and invest in retaining our attorneys, because they're the ones who are going to handle these serious cases, and they're going to do it right. And I'm incredibly proud of the fact that the Defender Association has never had a case come back for wrongful conviction. We've never had a case where our organization has been sued because someone had their due process rights violated, and they sat in jail, and they were convicted, or they may have sat on death row. Our organization does such incredible work, so that these issues don't happen. And the city has paid out tens of millions of dollars in wrongful conviction cases in the past few decades, because it wasn't done right. So when I say, we have to, invest in the public defense, this is what I mean. It's hard to quantify what that dollar amount looks like, but we have the examples of, here is a case where someone did not have effective counsel. They did not have trained counsel. Their due process rights were violated. And now the case is going to stay in the court system for years. It's going to stay in post-conviction for years. It's going to come back through, the court system. That costs the city tens of millions of dollars, and has cost the city tens of millions of dollars. So invest in us now, invest in us early, so we can recruit, retain the best attorneys to do the work that we need to do. And also, we do more than what one would imagine we do in the courtroom through our social services staff. Primarily, we are connecting our clients to resources that are going to help keep them out of the system. So it's difficult to really convey to those who control the purse strings for the city, that the investment in public defense really is an investment in not only the people who do this work, but in public safety.
And when we talk about, the conversations we've been having in Philadelphia for so long now, racial equity, and fairness, your office, considering again that we are the poorest big city in America, is foundational to equity and fairness. And it just, I was, maybe I shouldn't have been, but I was shocked when I heard this testimony and alarmed when I heard it. And I thank you so much for coming on and telling us more about this, and hopefully more people hear about this, because it's so important. I'd like to turn it back over to Denise Clay Murray.
Yes, thank you, Larry, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Ms. Hudson. We really appreciate it. I guess my last question is, when you go out and you recruit people to become members of the Defenders Association, I guess, what inspires them to want to do this kind of work, especially when you look at some of the obstacles that are placed in front of you to do it?
That's an excellent question. City Council President Darrell Clark made a comment during the budget testimony that after I made my pitch regarding our salary inequity, that the people in this organization choose to do this work. We'll set aside the people who are the non-attorneys and focus on the attorneys, to answer that question. I think the right to counsel you know, we are the only constitutionally mandated attorneys, right? We are it. Public defenders are the only constitutionally mandated attorneys. And people who come to do this work really have a strong sense of and a strong commitment to that ideal, right? That everyone deserves counsel, but they deserve quality counsel, they deserve effective counsel, they deserve zealous counsel, so that we can protect their rights. Because everyone who's arrested, you know, we are the only ones standing next to them, with them in the courtroom, against the incredibly well-resourced arm of the state. And so the people that come to do this work really believe in that calling, that, you know, that I want to be the person standing next to someone who's indigent, and standing next to someone who may be themselves a victim of crime. 83% of our clients with serious felony charges have themselves been victims of crime multiple times in their lives. They want to stand next to the person who may be suffering from drug abuse, who may be suffering from a mental health issue. The majority of our clients have one or more instances of trauma and victimization throughout their lives. And so we come to this work because we really are standing next to you know, that person in court, to say, before you take away my constitutional, you know, before you take away my rights, before you deprive me of life and or liberty, you know, before, you know, you sentence me to a period of incarceration, you know, my lawyer is going to make sure that the state does everything that it is constitutionally required to do before that happens.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. You know, this is such an important issue for us, and I'm going to continue advocating for an increase in our funding. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. We'd like to thank Keisha Hudson for being with us, and I have one addendum I'd like to add here. A group of city council members, a majority of city council members, signed a letter written by council members Kenyatta Johnson and Isaiah Thomas to Mayor Kenny, asking the mayor to expand the public defender's budget by $5.8 million.
Well, it needs to happen, because why should people who are indigent have to, you know, play Russian roulette with their lives if they're accused of a crime? It's how we do criminal justice in this country. Nothing about it makes any sense. And it especially doesn't make sense when you have people who are in jail before they're even tried and convicted because they can't afford bail. It makes no sense when it's stuff like this. So hopefully they will get that additional money from the mayor's office, and actually put it somewhere, because it's going to take a lot for Pennsylvania itself to start giving money for public defenders. Because let's face it, there's Philadelphia, there's Pittsburgh, and there's Alabama in between.
Yeah, and you know, it's a challenge for anything criminal justice wise that isn't more prosecution or more prisons,
right,
in the state. And you know, hopefully this is the beginning of more funding for the public defenders to equal things out a little bit.
That would be good.
Now we're running short on time. So what I'd like to do now is play the first few minutes of our interview with Councilmember David O. We will make sure this is put on our website and our newsletter and our YouTube page, and we'll also play the rest of it next week. But here is the beginning of our interview with Councilmember David O. Okay, we are here with Councilmember David O. Councilmember, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
So, big news last week. the Special Committee on Child Separation released its report. Can you tell us what the impetus behind that report is and what are some of the key findings?
Well, the impetus around the report was the complaints by mostly mothers that were shocking if true, and very difficult actually to believe. But eventually, through a very long process of one thing and another, I was able to verify that what they were saying was true, and also find out the reasons why. And they mostly center on the fact of people who believe in doing good by not following the rules or following the law. That happens when people believe they have a higher mission and that they could avoid obstructions to that mission if they circumvent the law. And while that may be their intention, it does lead to a lot of bad situations where, in this case, you have a lot of over-reporting of things that should not be reported. Now, that's all very vague, so it's hard for me to summarize that way, so I'll say it this way. Someone misses a doctor's appointment. They have a good reason, but that's recorded as negligence. Someone is a victim of domestic abuse, and when they report it, the police notify DHS, and DHS removes the child from the mother's care. The mother is simply a victim of domestic violence. It would be far better to remove the abuser from her home and keep the child with the mother, but the child is removed and then subject to foster care. And then we begin a whole process of how that mother gets her child back, because a lot of the attitudes have become whether or not that mother is deserving of having her child back. And that's a whole subjective kind of set of trying to prove to someone who thinks you're not worthy. All of this is not a reason to remove a child. I would say it's a violation of the law. And again, we have a system where if you are a mandated reporter, and that's a lot of people. You could be a teacher, you could be a school nurse, you could be a principal, you could be a camp counselor, you could be a coach on a football team or a soccer team. You could be a nurse in a hospital. At any rate, if you do not report something, in hindsight, someone may come back to you and say, 12 months ago, you talked to this child, or you knew of this situation and you didn't report it. Therefore, now you are the subject of an investigation for the violation of, the Child Protective Services Act, which means you can be suspended from your job. You may not be able to teach. You might be taken out of the hospital. And while they are investigating what happened to you, you're unable to work, sometimes without pay. Your employer, for example, a hospital, may want none of that, and therefore they simply require that you report anything and everything that somebody may later say you should have reported. So if you are a doctor, or if you are a nurse, or if you are a teacher, where is your professional judgment? It's gone. You are now not reporting what you think should be reported. You're reporting anything that might get you in trouble. The problem with that is now you have all this over-reporting. And so in certain cases, the law requires that it be investigated, even if it is anonymous, even if it identifies no reasonable suspicion, which is a legal standard, reasonable suspicion of child abuse. And in most cases, overwhelmingly, like over 85% of the cases, have nothing to do with abuse. They have to do with someone's judgment about whether another person is fit for parenting, or in the case of the DHS workers themselves, or in Philadelphia, community umbrella agency, the CUA workers, that if they don't report it or they don't follow through, they don't remove children, they may themselves be at risk. And so there is too much removing of children for precautionary reasons that end up harming the child, not only causing trauma to the child and their parents, but also subjecting those children to physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. And there's too much of that going on.
And one of the things that the report mentioned is that people are aware of this, and therefore, for instance, women who are in abusive situations are less likely to come forward because they're afraid that their children will be taken away.
Yeah. So what I also found, like, listen, I really was unaware of this. I was raised, I lived in a poor, high crime neighborhood. And despite going to public school there and living under the circumstances there, I went to a magnet high school. I went to a good college. I went to law school. And right there, I am not the likely person to have to ever worry about someone removing my child from school or taking a child to the hospital and then having a social worker contact DHS and remove my child from my care. So it's just something that I'm just basically oblivious to until I took this job, until I began to get these complaints. But since then, what I found is that the people who are subject to this type of thing, who are mostly poor and Black, mostly, overwhelmingly, are very aware of this and what happens. And so, as you said, someone may be subjected to domestic violence, but doesn't want to report it for fear that something worse would happen. They'll lose their child, and that their child will be subject to harm of all sorts. But it's also true that some people don't want to take their child to a hospital because they don't want to say, like, my child fell out of bed, only to find someone saying, well, we're going to investigate that and we're removing your 3 children from you until this process ends. Even more so aligned to the social service mission of Department of Human Services, someone is in need of help. I'm living at a friend's house. I'm back home with my mom, living in an apartment over the garage. I just lost my job and I don't have food in the house. They should be able to call with every expectation that they will receive help, not that someone will come out and remove their children from them and now subject them to years of trying to get their children back over the fact they are simply in a hard financial situation. They have help, they have people, but they could use help. So many of the cases originate from someone contacting DHS or someone's sister or friend contacting DHS as a way of trying to get their friend some help. And then the result is the child or the children have been removed from, the mother, oftentimes a single mother. And then years pass where the child has been moved from foster home to foster home with evidence of physical abuse, neglect, and in cases, sexual abuse. And yet now here is real evidence, whereas a child was removed for none of those reasons, but now there is now evidence of abuse and the child is still not returned, still passed on from one place to another. So that is a serious problem, and one where I find like it should not be a struggle.
Okay, we would like to thank Councilmember David O for being with us. We will play the rest of that interview next week, and it'll also be in our newsletter and on our YouTube page because some very important things come up in that interview, as well as some budget discussion, which is very interesting to hear Councilmember O's perspective on it. We'd also like to thank Keisha Hudson for being with us. A very important discussion as well. And more, like I said, more than we bargained for. when we first scheduled that, Denise. It was definitely interesting.
Yeah, it was.
So we would like to thank everybody for joining us. And next week, like I said, we're going to have the rest of our interview with Councilmember O. And we will also have an election preview next week. The primary is the following week. So we have a lot to talk about next week. And we hope to see you then. Have a good week, everybody.